Okay, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the physiology lecture with Dr. Falak. In this lecture, we will discuss about the motor control by brainstem. It's one of the most important neuroanatomical and the neurophysiological concept that students find difficult to understand. So, have you ever thought about that why can a person with severe cortical damage still maintain the posture and muscle tone? Have you seen a patient? So this posture and tone is basically maintained because the brainstem motor system is continue function despite the cortical damage. So this is why the brainstem is so much important. Regarding the hierarchical organization, you should be knowing that cerebral cortex is responsible for the initiation of voluntary movement, while brainstem it controls the posture, the tone and the reflex movement, while the spinal cord is important for the execution of the movement. So in this topic, at the end of this discussion, you will be able to explain how the brainstem regulate basic motor functions and reflex activities. You should be able to identify the major brainstem structures that are responsible for motor control. You should be able to discuss how the brainstem integrates signals from higher brain center and coordinate both voluntary as well as involuntary movement. So coming to the brainstem, it's the part of the central nervous system that is located between the diencephalon and the spinal cord. It's sometimes considered as the upward extension of the spinal cord because it contains the sensory as well as the motor centers that control the head and neck region. It's divided into three main parts, the midbrain, the pons and the medulla oblongata, while it's composed of the gray matter and white matter, and its main function is that it acts as a conduit between the spinal cord and the higher centers and different type of tracts and the nuclei present in this brainstem part. Regarding composition, it's composed of gray matter and the white matter. The gray matter is mainly composed of the nuclei that include the cranial nerve nuclei. It's very important that you should be knowing that cranial nerve number 3 to cranial nerve number 12, they all nuclei present in the brainstem. It also includes intrinsic brainstem nuclei like red nucleus, vestibular nucleus, and substantia nigra. It's a part forms the reticular formation. Example, the pontine and medullary reticular nuclei, they are very important. Again, they are present as a gray matter of the brainstem. While white matter include the ascending sensory tracts and the descending motor tracts and various interconnections within the cerebellum and the higher brain centers. Regarding the function of the brainstem, you should be knowing that it controls various autonomic as well as motor functions. In the autonomic functions, it's the main center for the cardiovascular and the respiratory activities, while the partial gastrointestinal functions are also being controlled by the brainstem. But when we specifically talk about the motor function, the brainstem is responsible for the maintenance of posture, regulation of the muscle tone, control of the balance, coordination of the head and eye movement, integration of various reflex movements, and thus it overall controls the axial and the proximal muscles. When we talk about the major brainstem motor centers or specifically nuclei, you should be clear in the mind that there are three main important nuclei that are present in the brainstem. These nuclei they send descending motor tract to the spinal cord and thus affect the motor activity. The most important one is the red nucleus. The site is midbrain, while the major function is that it facilitates the flexor activity of the anti-gravity muscles. The second is the vestibular nuclei. They are located in the pons and the medullae and they are responsible for the balance and the extensor tone facilitator. The third one is the reticular formation. You know they are present throughout the brainstem and they are responsible for the control of the posture and the tone overall. So first coming to the red nucleus, it's located in the midbrain part of the tegmentum. It receives fibers from the cortex, that is the corticorubral and the corticospinal tract. It also receives fibers from the cerebellum. It gives rise to rubrospinal tract. While the main functions include it facilitates flexor limb movements, it coordinates limb movement, it works with the cerebellum to control the posture. So how it works? The motor cortex sends different fibers to the red nucleus. From the red nucleus, the fiber decussates in the midbrain and then they descend as the rubrospinal tract. They are going to synapse with the interneuron and the motor neuron, and specifically they act the activity of the alpha motor neuron to control the flexor muscle movement. The clinical correlation is very important because the red nucleus injury, either above or below the red nucleus, it can present different clinically. For example, if you are getting injury above the red nucleus, the person can present as a decorticate rigidity. In this patient, you will find that the upper limbs are flexed while the lower limbs are extended. It's because as the lesion is above the red nucleus, it means the tracts that are coming from the red nucleus or the adjacent vestibulospinal tract and the pontine reticulospinal tract, they're all intact. So that's why their action is unopposed. So that's why the lower limb is extended. And this condition is known as decorticate rigidity. While if the lesion is below the red nucleus, it means the person can present as decerebrate rigidity and you will find extension all over the body. It's because all of the fibers that are coming below the red nucleus, they're all severed, and then the vestibulospinal tract and the pontine reticulospinal tract, their function is unopposed, and that's why the whole body is in extension and rigidity position. Now, second most important is the vestibular nuclei. You should be knowing that there are 4 nuclei per side, in total of 8 nuclei present in the brainstem. They are superior, inferior, medial and lateral. The vestibular nuclei are going to receive input from the vestibular apparatus through vestibular nerve. And you know what are the main component of the vestibular apparatus? That is the semicircular canal, the otolith organ. Vestibular nuclei also receive input from the cerebellum, while they are responsible to give origin of the lateral and the medial vestibulospinal tract. Now coming to the function, the vestibular nuclei, they are responsible and they work in close association with the pontine reticular nuclei to control the anti-gravity muscles. They send strong excitatory signals to the anti-gravity muscles. They are responsible for the equilibrium. They control extensor muscle tone. They stabilize head and body during movement, while their clinical loss will lead to the postural instability and the loss of extensor inability. This slide is important because for those who want to learn more about the nuclei, for example, the first is the superior vestibular nuclei. It's located in the upper pons. It's important for the eye movement control. It sends fiber to the nuclei of cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 4 and cranial nerve number 6 through medial longitudinal fasciculi. Then comes the medial vestibular nucleus. It's located in the pons and the upper medulla. It's important for the control of head and neck posture. It gives rise to medial vestibulospinal tract. Then comes the lateral vestibular nuclei. It's the largest vestibular nuclei. It gives origin to the lateral vestibulospinal tract. It's important to control the anti-gravity extensor tone and posture of the anti-gravity muscles. The last is the inferior vestibular nuclei. It's located in the medulla. It's responsible for the integration of the vestibular and the cerebellar signals, and its most important function is to balance. Now third is the reticular formation. The reticular formation, as you all know, that it's a system of interconnected neurons that are located throughout the brainstem. And when we talk about the nucleus, there are two main important nucleus of the reticular system. Number one is the pontine reticular nuclei, and there is the medullary reticular nuclei. As far as pontine reticular nuclei are concerned, they receive input from the vestibular nuclei, the deep nuclei of the cerebellum, and they give rise to pontine reticulospinal tract. What is their main function? They're responsible for the facilitation of extensor tone, or they are going to excite the axial muscles. While medullary reticular nuclei, they receive input from the corticospinal, rubrospinal and other motor pathway, while they give rise to medullary reticulospinal tract. While the function is that they're going to inhibit the extensor tone or the axial muscle. It means that these pontine reticular nuclei and the medullary reticular nuclei, they function as antagonistic to each other. It's also very important to remember that cortical signals can disinhibit medullary system to allow the pontine system to induce standing. Whenever we talk about the motor tract that are passing through the brain stem, they include the pyramidal system like the corticospinal tract, corticorubral tract, corticobulbar tract, while the extrapyramidal system, it includes the rubrospinal, vestibulospinal, reticulospinal and tectospinal tract, while we are also having the medial longitudinal fasciculi, and they are interconnected pathway that are connected different part of the brainstem with each other, and they're responsible for the coordination pathway, but they are not considered as the motor tract. Now coming to the major brainstem motor tracts, they are responsible to regulate the muscle tone, the posture and the reflex movement. They control the axial and the proximal muscle movement. Now let's see. The vestibular nuclei, they give rise to medial vestibulospinal tract that is responsible for the head and neck stabilization, while the second is the lateral vestibulospinal tract that is important for the balance and extensor tone or simple postural adjustment. The reticular formation, remember, it was giving rising to two tracts, the pontine or the medial reticulospinal tract that facilitate extensor muscle, and medullary or the lateral reticulospinal tract that was inhibiting extensor muscle. The red nucleus, as we have studied, that it gave rise to rubrospinal tract. Again, it facilitates the flexor muscles. While another we have is the superior colliculi that give rise to tectospinal tract, and it's important for the reflex movement of the head and eye movement. So this picture is taken from the Guyton and Hall, and you can see the various tracts that are descending through the motor pathway. For example, this one is the tectospinal tract. You can see here in the midbrain the superior colliculus is there. The fiber are going to decussate and then they descend downward. The second is the pontine reticulospinal tract. They are arises from the pons and then they descend downward on the same side. Then comes to the medullary reticulospinal tract. Again, they are going to descend on the same side. And here you are going to find the red nucleus that is again present in the midbrain. The fiber are decussating on the opposite side and then they later on turns as the rubrospinal tract. So it means that if there is any injury to the tectospinal or the rubrospinal tract, the person will be having presentation on the opposite side, while for the pontine reticulospinal tract, the medullary reticulospinal tract and the vestibulospinal tract, the injury will be on the same side. Substantia nigra is also a very important part of the brainstem, but it does not act as a main motor system, but it acts as a motor modulator. It's located in the midbrain. It lies between the cerebral peduncles and the tegmentum, and it contains dopamine producing neurons. It's a motor regulatory center that controls the movement indirectly through basal ganglia circuit. It's responsible for sending dopaminergic projections to the striatum via the nigrostriatal pathway. Its main function is to facilitate the initiation of voluntary movement. It regulates muscle tone and smooth coordination of the movement. Thus, it modulates motor activity rather than directly activating muscle fiber. Now coming to the brainstem motor reflex control center, that is superior collicula. Superior collicula is very important because it integrates visual, auditory and somatosensory inputs to generate coordinated head, neck and limb movement for rapid reorientation. It's important for the visual reflex center, head and eye orientation toward the visual stimuli. It gives rise to origin of the tectospinal tract. Then comes the inferior colliculi. It again is having an indirect role in motor function by integrating auditory signals with the motor responses, especially in the startle reflex, head and eye movement and sound localization. So how brainstem integrate the motor signals and coordination? First of all, brainstem integrate motor signals from higher brain region, that is the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum, to coordinate both voluntary and involuntary movement. Later pyramidal tract or the descending motor pathway. For example, the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tract, they pass through the brainstem and they are carrying voluntary motor commands. Then comes the extrapyramidal system that include the red nucleus, the reticular formation. They're responsible to regulate the postural control and automatic movement. Cerebellum communicate with the brainstem via cerebellar peduncle, fine-tuning movement by adjusting motor output based on the sensory feedback. While the vestibular system within the brainstem help maintain balance and coordination, thus ensuring smooth execution of the movement. So in this way you can see that the brainstem is associated with the different parts of the central nervous system, so that's why it's responsible for the integration of the motor signals and coordination of nearly of all the movements. There is another part that is very important and it includes the brainstem reflex control of the movement. Remember, there is another type of reflex movement that are controlled via the spinal cord, but there are certain reflexes that are also controlled through the brainstem. These reflexes are essential for the balance and coordinated movement. So first see the writing reflex. Its main function is that it maintains the body position, right? Main nuclei is that mainly vestibular nuclei along with the cerebellum. They act through the vestibulospinal tract to control the writing reflex. Then comes the vestibulo-ocular reflex. It stabilizes gaze during head movement. And the main nuclei of the tract responsible to control are that vestibular nuclei. It sends fibers to the eye muscles nuclei, for example, third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerve via medial longitudinal fasciculi. Then comes the startle reflex. This is the rapid protective response that is mediated by the reticular formation, especially pontine reticular nuclei via reticulospinal tracts. Then is the postural reflex. It maintains an upright posture. The nuclei responsible are the vestibular nuclei and the reticular nuclei. They act through vestibulospinal and the reticulospinal tract to control all these reflexes. It's very important, as we have discussed, that cranial nerve number 3 to 12 nuclei, they are all present in the brainstem. They are responsible to control the eye movement, the facial expression, the mastication, swallowing, speech, and the tongue movement. So this chart is very important. On one side you can see that the cranial nerve nuclei, the second the brainstem level, and the third is the motor function they perform. So you can see here that cranial nerve number 3, that is oculomotor nerve, its nucleus is oculomotor nuclei, the location is the midbrain, and they are responsible for the eye movement because they supply the superior, inferior, medial rectus and the inferior oblique muscle. Then comes the nucleus of the cranial nerve number 4, that is the trochlear nerve nuclei, located in the midbrain, and it supplies the superior oblique muscle and thus it controls eye movement as well. Then comes the trigeminal motor nuclei, the abducent nuclei and the facial nerve nuclei. They are all located in the pons and they are responsible to control the motor activity of the muscles of mastication, the muscles of the eye as well as the muscles of facial expressions. Then comes the glossopharyngeal nerve nuclei and the nucleus ambiguus. They are present in the medulla and they are supplying the muscles of swallowing. Then comes the nerve nuclei of the vagus nerve, that is the dorsal motor nuclei of the vagus nerve. It also acts through the nucleus ambiguus to control the muscles of the larynx and pharynx. Then comes the accessory muscles and the spinal accessory nuclei. They are present in the medulla or spinal tract and they control the neck muscles. Then comes the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. They are present in the medulla and they are important for the tongue movement. So cranial nerve nuclei in the brain stem act like a lower motor nuclear center, right? They receive command from the higher center, for example the corticobulbar tract, and then they activate specific muscles of the head and neck. It's very easy to remember that eyes in the midbrain, face in the pons, while swallowing and the tongue in the medulla, to remember all these actions of the specific cranial nerve nuclei. And remember, they're all being controlled at the level of brainstem. There are other brainstem motor reflexes that are carried through the cranial nerves. For example, corneal reflex. The corneal reflex is mediated by the cranial number 5 to cranial number 7. Then we have jaw jerk reflex that is mediated by cranial number 5. Gag reflex through cranial nerve number 9 to 10. Pupillary light reflex cranial number 2 to 3. And the vestibulo-ocular reflex cranial number 8. give fibers to the cranial nerve nuclei 3, 4 and 6. So remember, they are very basics reflexes and they are acting through the cranial nerve, and again which is located in the brainstem. So let's quickly summarize what we have learned today. The brainstem is not just a connection between the brain and the spinal cord, but it plays a crucial role in the motor control by regulating the tone, the posture, the muscle tone, reflexes, and the coordinated movement of the eye, head, and the body. We have discussed the major brainstem structures involved in the motor control, including the red nucleus, the vestibular nucleus, the reticular formation, and important descending tracts like vestibulospinal tract, the rubrospinal tract. So understanding these pathways is very essential because they patient can present clinically, and even they are very important to learn about the basic physiological concept. So thank you for watching my channel. I hope so it have worked for you, and inshallah we will meet the next time. Thank you so much.